Morning, friends. Finishing chapter 3. Ever ready to scorn tradition, he restricted traditional clothing and forbade camel caravans to enter cities. He promulgated legal codes and established a network of secular courts to enforce them. In 1935, he announced that he would no longer tolerate references to his country as Persia, a word used mainly for foreigners, and would insist on Iran, the name by which its own citizens knew it. With typical resolve, he ordered that any mail from abroad addressed to Persia be returned unopened. Yet for all Reza Shah's reformist passion, he did not manage a true social transformation. Under his rule, newspapers were strictly censored, labor organizing forbidden, and opposition figures murdered, jailed, or forced to flee. He forced nomadic tribes, which he considered relics of the past, incompatible with a modern state, into barren settlements where thousands suffered and died. Commerce was centralized in the hands of the state and a small cadre of loyal entrepreneurs. The Shah himself became enormously wealthy by extracting bribes from foreign businesses and extorting money from tribal leaders. He confiscated so much land that at the peak of his power he was the country's largest landowner. Reza Shah eliminated all the thieves and bandits of Iran, one member of the British Parliament observed, and made his countrymen realize that henceforth there would be only one thief in Iran. In 1934, Reza Shah traveled to Turkey to meet Ataturk. The two men got along famously, but as they toured the Turkish countryside, the Shah became depressed and frustrated as he realized how quickly Turkey was progressing toward modernity and secularism. He returned home determined to redouble his campaign and transform Iranian society. In his zeal, he charged ahead without regard for the country's long-established social patterns or its religious beliefs. Utterly lacking Ataturk's statesmanship and political skill, he turned much of the population against him. Reza Shah was fascinated by the fascist movements that emerged in Europe during the 1930s. Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler seemed to him to be embarked on the same path he had chosen, purifying and uniting weak, undisciplined nations. He launched an oppressive campaign to obliterate the identity of minority groups, especially Kurds and Azeris, and he established a society for public guidance to glorify his ideas in person. Baldur von Schirach, head of Hitler Youth, led a stream of Nazi dignitaries who visited Iran and spoke glowingly of the emerging German-Iranian alliance. The cardinal goal of the German nation is to attain its past glories by promoting national pride, creating a hatred of foreigners, and preventing Jews and foreigners from embezzlement and treason. One of the Shah's newspapers declared, "Our goals are certainly the same." Partly because he needed a foreign friend who shared his growing enmity toward Britain and the Soviet Union, Reza Shah developed great sympathy for the German cause. When World War II broke out, he declared a policy of neutrality that tilted decidedly toward Germany. He allowed hundreds of German agents to operate in Iran. Many worked to build support networks among the regional warlords. Western leaders feared that the Nazis were planning to use Iran as a platform for an attack across the Soviet Union southern border that would greatly complicate the Allied war effort. To prevent that, British and Soviet troops entered Iran on August 25, 1941. Their planes dropped leaflets over Tehran. "We have decided that the Germans must go," they said, "and if Iran will not deport them, then the English and the Russians will." Some Iranians must have appreciated the irony of these two countries positing themselves as Iran's friends and protectors, but there was little they could do. Iran's army yielded in a matter of days. After seizing strategic points around the country, Allied commanders demanded that Reza Shah sever his government's ties to Germany and allow the free use of his territory by their forces. If he had not alienated himself from almost every segment of Iranian society, and if he had kept a cadre of wise advisers around him instead of systematically exiling or murdering them, he might have been able to resist. Instead, he found himself alone, his dreams shattered by his own narrow-mindedness, corruption, and boundless egotism. Reza Shah did not wish to work for the Allies, and they had no use for him either. He abdicated on September 16, 1941. The next day, his eldest son, 21-year-old Mohammad Reza, was sworn in to succeed him. No more was heard from Reza, who died in Johannesburg 3 years later. Although Reza Shah imagined himself a modernizing visionary, in fact he reinforced the tradition of istabdad, or absolute rule, that lies at the heart of Iranian history. His reforms were superficial, and because of the brutality with which they were imposed, deeply resented by his subjects. He made no progress toward creating the sense of shared enterprise and civic responsibility that is at the heart of successful societies. His efforts to rid Iran of foreign influence were praiseworthy in theory, but disastrous in effort. In the end, his dictatorial impulses brought him down by driving him toward an alliance with fascist powers. His departure left Iran in the hands of foreigners and a weak, confused young king. Monarchy had once again failed to resolve the country's continuing crisis of development and identity. When World War II ended, Iranians were desperate for a new kind of leader. Have a good day, friends.